welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, here with my co-host, Bethany Ruff.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to the show. And we have another amazing guest to introduce to you today. Dr. Stewart McGill is a professor emeritus at the University of Waterloo, where he was a professor for 30 years. In that time, he became an expert on the subject of back pain, how it's caused, and how it can be fixed. His work produced over 240 peer-reviewed scientific papers. He has written several books, including Back Mechanic, which teaches the reader how to become their own best back expert. He is currently the Chief Scientific Officer for BackFit Pro Incorporated, where he is still consulted for the most difficult cases of back pain. Professor Start McGill, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Casey and Bethany.
Good morning. How should we call you? Would you like to be known as Dr. McGill for this podcast? What title would you like?
Well, I don't really like using the doctor title. I don't want to confuse people with being a physician or a surgeon or a professor. I suppose the proper term is Professor McGill. However, you're Casey and I'm Stu. Let's go with what our mothers called us.
That sounds great. You deserve to be called Dr. Stewart McGill, but we will call you Stu for today's conversation. We appreciate that. Okay, so before we get into the meat of our discussion today, all about back pain, I've got kind of a question for you, not really related to back pain, but I have a rake, and I was using it a few years ago, and I didn't want to take it back to the garage, and so I just set it down in my living room. And every now and again, a few times a day, I'll walk through the living room, and I'll accidentally step on the rake, and the rake will smack me right in the face every single time. And it's really annoying, and it's very painful, and the more I do it, the more it hurts. What do you think I should do about that rake? Do you think I should leave it there? Like, what would be your advice about the rake?
What a fabulous parody of modern back pain. Can I build on that story a tiny bit?
Yes, please.
So Casey gets up every morning, steps on the rake, gets whacked in the face, and then one day he gets inspired and goes to a certain type of physical therapist, but a physical therapist that believes, posture doesn't matter, physical load doesn't matter, and that physical therapist doesn't do an assessment, and that therapist tells you, you're magnifying your pain. You've got non-specific face and head pain. So let's think of a mental diversion for you. So tomorrow you get up and you step on the rake, you smash your face, but you go to another therapist and they don't assess you and they say, you've got non-specific pain. We'll try and maybe a cognitive behavioral therapy intervention. And then you go away, and then the next day you step on the rake and you smash your face. But after today, you will have read the book Back Mechanic, and you've learned a little bit about assessment. And then you will stop and pause and assess why you have a broken nose and a few missing teeth and a sore face. And you will say, I will bet, after analyzing the mechanism here, that getting smacked in the face with a rake is probably important. I'm going to take the rake and put it in the garden shed. The next day, your pain winds down and you're back to enjoying life. So there's a metaphor, and thanks for kicking that off with a fun story.
That sounds like a much better way to go than smacking my face with the rake every day. It's not very fun.
But isn't it curious that almost everyone who shows up with back pain has a metaphorical rake? There is something that they continue to do that causes an overload of the tissues that are causing pain. And there are some people that say, stop looking at the tissues. And my answer to them is they haven't gone to a jiu-jitsu class, or they haven't played on a hockey rink and learned about the power of position and technique and posture and sparing their body, and how to adapt their body with appropriate exercise and change their patterns to get rid of the cause and know how to build their body all back up again. It is very much a full physical, psychological, social process. But it starts with the physicality and the fact that posture and movement migrates load from one tissue to another. The great coaches, as I know you are, with a little bit of correction, migrate the stress away from the tissues that are currently either damaged or sensitized.
Hmm.
I love that analogy. So on that same line, I find that so many of my clients, whether they're coming to see me for a little bit of more movement awareness, proprioception awareness, or structural integration, their modern life positions, they're mostly sedentary, they do a lot of driving, they're texting, they're on their phone, they're typing on their computer, they're eating, they're watching TV. Everything is in this slumped, forward flexed, almost kyphotic forward head position. How do we kind of titrate out what is their structure, how they're holding their body throughout the day versus maybe that one movement that's pulling them into pain? So I guess my question is, how have our spines changed as humans over our evolution, and how is modern life pulling us into pain?
Well, I get asked that question or various forms of it quite often, and I've only been on this planet for 64 years, so I can't really go back and ask how people's pain were a few centuries ago. But well, let me tell a little bit of a story here. Let's go back a few million years ago and look at the earliest forms of humans and where we came from. If you look at a whale, in our clinic, we have all kinds of very biofidelic models that we show patients the specific mechanisms of their pain. What causes a disc herniation or an end plate fracture or a spondylolisthesis or whatever the mechanism happens to be. And then I show them some animal spines. So let's take a whale. A whale, if you look at the lumbar spine of a whale, it's very special in that the architecture and the musculature drive that massive fluke or tail fin of a whale. Lots of motion, beautiful power production. Do you know that whales do not have discs the way we do? They have ball and socket joints.
Hmm.
And that's how so your hip joint, for example, is designed to create power, which is high rotational force throughout a big range of motion. That's what a ball and socket does. However, a human spine disc is not a ball and socket. It falls into the category of adaptable fabric. So imagine your shirt. If you could pinch your shirt in two places fairly close together and move them back and forth, creating stress strain reversals on the fibers of your shirt, quickly they would delaminate. Now, the difference between your shirt and a disc is the fibers forming the outer rings of the shirt. They're held together with a ground substance, but they contain a pressurized hydraulic fluid in the middle, the disc nucleus. So when you delaminate the collagen fibers through repeated heavy end range of motion, that's okay if that's what you're adapting to do. So we've measured, say, Middle Eastern belly dancers, incredible athletes, fabulous motor control and whatnot. But do you know, not one of those women could do a sit up. And nor should they be able to, because they've adapted fabulous mobility and motor control. But the biological trade off that they made was the looseness, so to speak, between the fibers now means that if they went and got with a trainer who said, oh, we're going to start deadlifting, and within 3 weeks we want you deadlifting your body weight. Do you see they've adapted the wrong thing? So it's an adaptable fabric, but it can only adapt one way. So let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum now, a power lifter. A power lifter must create massive load-bearing ability through their body and through their spine. So a stiffer spine is much more resilient to load. But you'll notice a power lifter cannot throw a football. They can't take a slap shot. They even have trouble tying their shoes and scratching their ear. But That's the adaptation that they've made, highly resilient to load, but now so, both of the extremes, if you put it crassly, they're easy to kill. They're quite unidimensional. And
Mm.
most people want to be somewhere in the middle, have this wonderful balance in life so they can play hockey, go mountain biking, lift their kids off the floor, etc. But what that means in terms of the adaptive fabric of their spine is they can't go to the extremes and really push it. They need a little bit of mobility, a little bit of load bearing. So now I'm getting to the modern life. They sit in the office chair for hours, and then they go to the gym and get with a personal trainer who just over that hour so intensifies the motion. They might be doing repeated burpees, and then they do 10 Olympic lifts until they're tired and their form breaks. Do you know an Olympic lifter, and I've worked with some of the world's best, don't do repeated Olympic lifts. This is an aberration of some sport and then some gyms. The great Olympic lifters, they do one repetition to get the form perfect. They're working on perfect form, and then they put the weight down, they discuss, they figure out what little correction they need to do, and then they do another single, again grooving perfection, which leads them to ultimate performance. But that's not what goes on in gyms. So there's that element and new character to modern life that may be different than a few hundred years ago. And if I can finish this off, Bethany and Casey, do you have kids?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, I think it's absolute disgrace. And I'm not backing off on that and softening the words. It's a disgrace when I see moms driving their kids to school. And these kids are soft and forgive the description, but they waddle out of their mother's car to the school, and the scenario repeats again when they're picked up and taken home. I fear for these children going through life with that level of physical softness, loss of resilience, and all that goes along with that fail to adapt toughness. Now, would that have happened 300 years ago? I doubt it. So, as I said, I've only been on this planet a relatively short period of time, but even in my time, actually, I can give some evidence on this. When I was a professor, as part of our laboratory experience, the students learned assessment in the very first term at the university. We had a full lab on assessment. So they would measure things, various fitness variables, VO2 max, ranges of motion, strength, and everything else. So I started in 1985, and we kept records of that incoming class. From 85 to 95, there was an alarming loss of basic function, resilience, and strength in those students, entirely correlated with the advent of the personal computer.
Wow.
Now, interestingly enough, and I became so discerned walking around campus and watching these soft waddling humans going to class. And I went to the president of the university and said, how about we really become an innovative university and make it mandatory that every student who comes to the University of Waterloo should have mandatory education in nutrition, movement, health, etc. And but of course, the professors of mathematics said, "Oh no, every student has to have mathematical literacy." The historians said, but everyone has to understand history so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So, I can go on and on and on, and you know where all of this ended up. But there's a little bit of an essay with certainly some impressions and biases. So I don't know if I've answered your evolutionary foundation there or not.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, considering we've only been on the earth X amount of years ourselves, we gotta just use what we've learned from textbooks and past history of how humans moved and mechanics. So let's kind of switch gears just a little bit to the common pains, common joint dysfunctions or spinal dysfunctions that people come in and see you with. So disc bulges, disc herniations, sciatica. Can you talk about those dysfunctions a little bit?
Sure. Well, when a person comes in with a disc bulge, that's usually a radiological diagnosis. And our assessment, which, by the way, I'll just tell a little bit of a story on that. As a professor, we had a couple of different laboratories, one that was designed to measure the loads on real living people doing things. So we did experiments on athletes and military, police, firefighters, different occupational groups, etc., measuring the stress distribution on the tissues in their body. Our second laboratory was an anatomy lab where we took cadaveric spines of people and some animals, and we would then apply the loads and watch the cascade of injuries and pain mechanisms occur. So then, with that foundation, when a person came in and they said, well, I've got a disc bulge, we would then assess them to see if, in fact, the disc bulge was the true mechanism and source of their pain. It might have been a little bit oblique. In other words, maybe they had a disc bulge at L4, but the pain was actually at L3, which looked pretty good on the MRI. But that joint had lost stiffness. It was a little bit hypermobile. And because it had micro movements in it, when shear load was applied, it triggered a nerve root, but it wasn't the L4 nerve root with the disc bulge. So the point in all of this is the assessment will reveal whether or not the disc bulge is the source of pain. So how does a disc bulge occur? Recall my description of the architecture of the disc. So if you simply got on your hands and knees and did a cat camel exercise, hump up like a camel, flex your spine, and then fully extend your spine over and over again, and you had never really insulted your spine before, we've never measured any change to the person's spine other than it gets a bit more flexible. But you cannot create a disc bulge by simply moving back and forth without load. So some people say, oh, well, it's like a credit card. You bend a credit card back and forth, you reach a magical number of stress strain reversals, and the card cracks and breaks. And this is what happens to your spine. Well, we haven't measured that. Instead, if you start moving your spine under load, full range of motion, imagine, say, allowing too much butt wink in a deep squat, for example, over and over and over again. Now, some people are susceptible to this more than others, and we can talk about individual differences that make some people more susceptible and others more resilient. But nonetheless, over time, as the ground substance holding the fibers together in the annulus of the disc, the outer rings, they start to delaminate, but the pressure of the nuclear gel seeps between the delaminations of the fibers, slowly working its way through with repeated pressurized movements until finally there's a disc bulge. And then the disc bulge, there's a lot of other features. The nucleus of the disc was fused up in the fetal spine on the day of neurulation, which is at the beginning of the second month after conception. In other words, that nucleus has never seen the mother's immune system when it crossed the placenta. So that nucleus, the very first time it seeps through the annulus and is exposed to blood and the antibodies of the person's immune system, the body sets off a massive immune inflammatory response. It hurts like hell, as if you've ever been there yourself. Anyway, that's one pathway to disc herniation. But another common one. Let's take a person who goes to the trainer, and the trainer says, inside 3 months, you're a stay-at-home mom. You're looking after a couple of young kids. You have to pick them out of the crib. You should be deadlifting. And they say, all right, you weigh 135 pounds. You will deadlift 135 pounds within 3 months. Well, that person, maybe their parents drove them to school. They had deficit mineral in their spines to begin with. That's built primarily in women when they're 15 years of age. It's a critical time to develop bone mass. But nonetheless, they then do the deadlift, but maybe they've got good form. The trainer is doing his job, but the trainer got greedy with the progression of compressive load. They get an end plate fracture. So the pressurized nuclear gel inside the disc, so high because they're now deadlifting their body weight, it creates a little, first of all, a micro crack and then an open fracture of the top and the bottom of the disc. And then the nucleus seeps through the end plate down into the vertebral body. Now they've lost some disc height, the joint becomes unstable, and there's a whole character of pain. The pain migrates. Some days it's in the left butt, the next day it's in the right low back, the next day their thigh is gone numb, and etc. So there's a character of an unstable joint, but the mechanism was too much compression, too much, too fast before the adaptation took place.
Can I ask a question real quick along those lines?
Yeah, I know I haven't got to sciatica, and maybe if I'm talking too much, shut me up.
Oh,
But
no,
these
not
are
at
some
all.
of the.
I could listen to you all day. This is so fascinating. Before we moved on to sciatica, I'm just interested with that same example. So you take the mom who's leaning over into the crib, picking her kid up and down multiple times a day. Trainer decides we need to start deadlifting. In that process, over the 3 months or however long it is that she's deadlifting and increasing loads, how do we know, how do you know to go and assess the spine or chase the pain of where it kind of might be bouncing around between glute or hamstring or low back or shoulder as it jumps around? How do you know that that person hasn't in the meantime made an alteration to the way that their foot is hitting the ground, or maybe their knee or their hip is collapsing, or SI joint imbalance? How do you know where to begin with that person when they have pain that moves?
Well, the assessment will reveal it every time. If the person is competent in assessment, they will figure it out. So, for example, let's say that the person reports pain with a certain maneuver, be it a squat or a lunge or whatever it happens. Maybe it's just getting out of their office chair. And then the assessment is done, and they say, well, yes, your knee is collapsing into valgus. It's causing a pinch in your left hip labrum, and you move your pelvis away from that particular pain, twisting your spine, setting off the instability, and there you go. So now you might say, all right, well, let's isolate that. Let's add a little bit of abdominal bracing, just that, as the sole intervention, and repeat. And if the person says, you know what, my pain is gone, you've just stiffened out the micro movement that was triggering the pain and causing to migrate that particular day to the right hamstring or wherever it happens to be. Or you might say, all right, instead of a lift, let's go down on your knees. Let's take out half of the mechanics and just tall kneel and move your hips back. There's the painful labrum, but we've taken out the knee equation. Let's put the knee into the equation and repeat. So, I mean, I know you're a corrective exercise specialist, Bethany. I hope that's the answer that you wanted me to steer this discussion towards, but a good assessor will always figure it out. And then you confirm your findings and hypothesis by providing the mechanical antidote. And the antidote might be a change in posture, not going so deep, changing the stiffness, changing the spine curve, adding some gluteal integration, whatever the answer is. But you will know immediately if that person then says, my pain is now gone.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's a great explanation. Thank you so much for that. So kind of moving into sciatica, I feel like it's very, very misunderstood. Can you talk a little bit about your findings with it?
Yes. Wow, where to start on that one? My findings. Well, years ago, uh, we had a very strong foundation in anatomy, and we would do experiments on cadavers. We would wiggle the person's ankle and measure the distraction of the nerve at L5 up in the spine. For example, we used to put India ink on the nerves and do different distal movements to see what distal movements move nerves. And then we would hold down a nerve, simulating a disc bulge or an arthritic spur or inflammatory soup or whatever it is. And then we would see how that hangs up the nerve, both in an underhook and overhook, from different directions and that kind of thing. So with that foundation, when a person comes in with sciatica, there are several candidates for creating that neural irritation. It might be compression on the nerve root from a disc bulge. As I said, it might be an arthritic facet joint or a hypertrophied ligamentum flavum, but nonetheless, there's something pressing on that nerve root. So then when you straighten your leg and pull your toes towards your head, you are tightening the fourth and the fifth sciatic nerve root. Then look down. Oh, that just took your pain away. Look up. That made the pain worse. Now, that is the polar opposite of what the physical therapists are taught in the slump test. What's going on? Well, it's almost always a neural underhook. So the offense on the nerve occurs when the nerve slides caudally away from the head, so that the slump test is you look down and you cause the sciatica, but if you look up, no, that's the thing that causes the sciatica. So the idea of neurodynamics is you've got to understand neurodynamics and the mechanical features that cause specific sciatica symptoms from specific directions of traveling a nerve, or hitting end ranges where you either tighten or slacken off a specific nerve root. Friction without end range sciatica is more typical of an inflammatory soup in part of the neural canal that could be from a disc bulge or an infection or something like that. Are, the sciatica changes typically as a function of age. So younger people who get sciatica, the more common candidate will be a disc bulge. But when that person gets a little bit older, that's now gone. Their discs are past bulging. The discs have lost the hydraulic fluid that created the bulge before, but now their body grew some bone spurs and arthritic material to deal with the instability. I mean, you get bone spurs in the vertebra at the level of the unstable disc. So now sitting, which used to be causative of their sciatica, now takes it away. Totally different pattern. So they're usually finding the sweet spot. And what we will do there is the person, they might say they do a front plank on the wall, and then they do a pelvic tilt back and forth, finding that sweet spot that takes the sciatic symptoms away. And then they learn where that position is, spine position awareness, how to move, staying within that pain-free zone, etc. And then we come up with an appropriate antidote. For example, nerve flossing. So some people will say motion is good. well, hold on now. It might be the spine motion that is causing the sciatic symptoms, but nerve motion takes them away. And nerves have this curious ability that if you floss a nerve back and forth, generally speaking, it clears out the mechanical offense and finds its own pathway. So we will try nerve flossing. We call it tickling the dragon's tail because sometimes it's absolutely magical, and other times it creates a raging neural fire, either a femoral root fire or so. We have some tests to help us better predict who will get fire from the dragon or who will be blessed and their sciatica is now gone. And then it's a matter of tuning the training to create the mechanical adaptations that will take the person away from their sciatic mechanism. And it might be stop sitting at your desk all day long. And every time you eat, you now have to go for a 10-minute walk. But your 10-minute walk will be adjusted for you where you swing your arms in an exaggerated manner about the shoulders. What does that do? It creates perfect neural flossing. We don't need to get into the physiological benefits of going for repeated walks throughout the day, the psychological, the social benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So I've probably talked a little bit too much, but those are the main issues with sciatica. I know piriformis syndrome is often brought up. That is much more rare than people think. The assessment will always reveal the cause. And yes, we do see patients with a true piriformis genesis to their sciatica, but it's much more rare than people think. So, they'll go to a specialist and they have sciatica, and the specialist will start doing, without assessment, piriformis stretches. And the person gets a analgesic effect, very temporary, 10 or 15 minutes from the piriformis stretch, thinking they are doing themselves a service. But the darn sciatica comes back in another hour. And they've been doing this for weeks, months, and even years. Doing the same thing is not going to get rid of their sciatica. However, if they truly have piriformis, that might have been the most appropriate intervention. Anyway, I'll stop at that point. Otherwise, we'll be on and on about sciatica.
I just love the common theme so far of everything we've talked about. What's so important, I think, for our listeners who are in pain or might have been dealing with any type of back pain is you're the driver of your ship. You can't expect to go to a movement therapist, no matter how qualified or how many degrees they might have hanging on their wall, and expect to be laying on a table and cracked and popped into a position and then have their pain completely eradicated. I feel like what I'm hearing from you is that you have to be the guinea pig in your own experiment. You have to be willing to notice, pay attention to, be aware, adjust the positions you're holding your body in, where you are in space, how you feel during the day. So pain medications, prescription, over-the-counter cortisone injections. What are your opinions with that? In my opinion, it just kind of it throws a wrench in the whole situation because it's making it now harder for the person who's experiencing the pain to tell what movements or positions are creating it.
Well, I'm certainly sympathetic to that, Bethany. Quite often, not always, but quite often when I see a patient coming in on pain meds, I know right away they've not been to an expert. They've been to a person who capitulated and said, well, I have no idea what's causing your pain, but take these pain meds, which is really an insult to their own expertise. That's rather severe to say, but I believe it. So when a person gets an appointment to come here, in the information packet to prepare for the assessment, we say, if you can, no medication. We want to see the truth. So pain meds hide the truth. Now, is pain good or is pain bad? Pain keeps you alive. It stops you from doing stupid things and will save your life quite often. But it can also be bad in that pain is a terrible corrupter of many systems in your body. You may have heard that chronic knee pain inhibits certain muscles. Well, get some severe knee pain, and it doesn't take much convincing to see that the person will be limping. You limp. Even when your knee pain goes away, there are some neurological changes that take place, and that person may continue to limp. It's so interesting when we took a cohort of police officers as an example, and we say, where does aberrant movement come from? Well, it comes from injury, it comes from pain, it also comes from habits. These police officers would walk across the laboratory with one arm stuck out at their side. And we thought, well, why are police officer after police officer walking in this stress concentrated pattern? And it turns out they were still thinking in their brain. They had their duty belt on with their gun. So, isn't it interesting? And certain athletes walk in, go to a rowing meet and walk and watch how the typical rower stands. Is it any wonder that there is a spine mechanism syndrome very peculiar and particular to rowers, just like there is in baseball pitchers or any other kind of athlete that does one thing over and over again. Anyway, we're getting back to the medication. So we prefer to address the cause, which is shown by the assessment. And have you heard of Vladimir Janda, the great Czechoslovakian neurologist?
I don't know that I'm familiar with him.
Okay. Well, what Yonda proposed, and he didn't have the medical instrumentation to prove this, but he was a very insightful fellow. And he proposed that chronic back pain and chronic hip pain inhibit the gluteals. That's what causes some people to limp. And he would watch people come into his lecture hall, just observe them walking and walking down the stairs and taking their seat. And then he would pull them up later and show that when they get out of a chair, they extend their hips with their hamstrings, not using their gluteals. It was a very clever eye. And I know you have a very similar eye to corrupted movement. And another thing he proposed, but never proved, was that chronic back pain and hip pain, while they inhibit the gluteal muscles in a few people, they also facilitate the hip flexors, is what he said, the hip flexors. So when a person stands up out of a chair, they take a few minutes to get upright and pull their hips forward. You know, that stiffness that they feel in the front of their hip?
Mm-hmm.
I forget the sign. They walk their hands up their thighs and grimace with their face and that kind of thing. Well, I believe we were the first people to actually measure this. And there's it's very clear now that some people get this neurological facilitation and inhibition due to pain. And what the modern neuroscience has shown is there are inhibitors and there are inhibitors of the inhibitors. And I can give, some interesting examples there where if you go to the world's strongest man, I believe it was 2 years ago, 2019, or it was maybe 2018, but it was the world's strongest man in Mogadishu, Africa. They had an event where the strong men had to squat 750 pounds, hit a low point mark, stand up with the weight, and whoever did the most reps won. Well, what's so interesting is go back and watch that video on YouTube, and you will see the mechanism of failure every single time in the lift before the failure. And you're going to see a little bit of instability. You're going to see a hip slide off to one side. The knee will buckle a tiny bit. In other words, the body sensed some instability. As soon as the brain senses instability, it shuts down neural drive. It's a protective mechanism. It won't let you put full force. It causes you to limp. And if you're a strong man under 750 pounds, you lose the next lift. So isn't that interesting that, I don't want drugs to mask any of this. I
Right. That's
need I
brilliant.
need I need to see the truth. And
It's
now I can get at coming up with an appropriate evidence-based proven intervention that will help that person.
I
So,
love that. That's so smart, and it's so smart of the body. I think about what you were talking about earlier in the facet joints that would become arthritic above or below the injured area or the compromised area. It's your body just trying to protect, right? And limit your range of motion, almost like an internal cast.
so I've got a question for both of you, actually. You both have referenced this, the assessment part, and how important that is. And you have both kind of referenced each one of you has a gift. I've seen it every single day watching Bethany work with people, and she will watch somebody move, just walk around. She's even requested people like send pictures from their, home office and how they sit and how they look at a computer. And from that, they can gather so much information about movement. And Stu, I've heard you talk about how your assessment there's a specific assessment that you do, but you also start that assessment from the second that somebody parks the car outside of the facility and they get out of the car and walk in. Like you are observing that person, and every way that that person is moving is telling you a story about their pain. Is that correct?
Very much so. I'll just well, should I? Do you want to hear a little story on that, or do you want to
Absolutely.
finish your question?
No, absolutely. Love a story.
Every now and then, a hospital or a medical facility asks me to come in and see a patient on a stage, or maybe two or three patients on a stage in front of their medical staff. I was asked to go to this very prestigious spine facility, and they had about 70 clinicians, surgeons, neurosurgeons, physiatrists, kinesiologists, trainers, physical therapists, occupational nurses, but all around back pain. And so they introduced me, and I said a couple of opening words to the audience. And then the assistant came over and said, "Professor, can we bring in the first patient for you? They're out in the waiting room." And I said, "No, I will go and receive the patient myself," which I always did. And I looked at everybody, and I thought they would come with me. Not a single person came with me down the hall. I went down and I saw the person sitting with their knees together, hands in their lap, slouched down, neck in full flexion. Now, number one, if you go to a medical textbook that is Clinical Depression Posture 101, that's the
Wow.
textbook posture. You sit in a depressed state with your knees together, ankles together, hands in your lap, in a victim's posture. Now, you know the stress concentration that's in their body from the posture I just described. They got out of the chair. Their first move was right into even more flexion. They had to, because the mechanic meant they had to get their mass out over their knees. They didn't know weightlifting 101, where you spread your knees, get your feet underneath, you suck some air and lean forward through your hips. They didn't know the most foundational movement. Anyway, you can start to see where already I had a very good hypothesis as to what was causing this person's pain. Not only their pain, but their clinical depression because of their being a victim.
Wow.
The person walked in, and I walked behind them. I saw the gate. I heard, and if I can do this, their footsteps were, in other words, I heard a foot drop and a foot slap as they walked in. So I know right away I'm dealing with an L4 nerve trap on one side. How much more assessment do I really need to do with these people? Anyway, so we walk onto the stage, and so what's your name? And what do you do? Oh, I'm a truck driver. And I said, can you tell me about your pain? And he said a little bit. And I said, well, let me guess. You have some pretty good days. And in fact, you have pretty good days for 2 or 3 weeks. And then you have a flare up, lasts a week. And then it calms down again. And he looked at me astounded, and he said, how did you know? And I didn't say too much. And then the whole time he was standing on his left leg with his left hip antalgic to the left. I mean, this was disc bulge behavior 101. You could see it, smell it, taste it a mile away. Anyway, I said to the medics, would everybody turn around now and face the wall and tell me about this patient? And they said, what do you mean? When are you going to do your assessment? And I said, well, I'm finished. He's got a dynamic disc bulge. It shrinks and grows based on his previous postures. And it's at L4, right? It'll be left side. Anyway, and I could just see some of the orthopods snicker at me. This arrogant son of a gun professor from Canada coming down here telling us what to do. Anyway, we then got into the MRI images and further testing, and that's exactly what it was. I got lucky that day and just happened to nail it. But after that, their arrogance melted away, and they started to realize how deficit their medical training had been, and their inadequacies in knowing what to do. In any case, I'm not. This isn't to condemn the medics at all. It was just that particular day in that particular clinic, they were actually clueless and completely missed the assessment. So yeah, when I when I was at the university, I had a little crack in my door, and I would peek through the crack at the person sitting on the waiting bench outside my office, which was the arrangement back in those days. But now the clinic is at my home. I retired from the university. I live in central Ontario, and people will usually get a rental car from the airport. And I watch them get out of their car, and it gives me a pretty good idea by the time they've come to the front door what's going on.
I just think that's so cool. Like, you are learning about people from watching them and listening to them, and that tells you all of the information you need. Like, yeah, you can do a formal assessment. There's things you can do in a formal test to discover and validate what you're seeing, but you're watching people, you're listening to people. I see that the same with Bethany. She just can watch people walk and walk away from her and see like, oh yeah, look at that. Look at the way they're walking. I'm like, yeah, they're walking to the south. Like, I can't see what you guys are seeing. You have this incredible gift. And so I guess my next question would be like, for somebody like myself who can't observe that much, or they don't know where their pain is coming from, what are some simple things that people can do to discover where the pain is coming from? And referring back to how we open the show, taking the rake and putting it somewhere else, doing simple things that get them out of pain.
Well, I could answer that question two ways. The first one you may not like the answer to. But if you cannot read a person's pain and you cannot read a person, I'm sorry, but you're in the wrong business. Now, just to add a couple more stories to that, I had as a patient the fella who won the Poker Stars competition in Vegas. You can imagine this is absolute gold. And when I learned he was coming, I got out a deck of cards and I said, I'm not missing this opportunity to learn. And I pulled out some cards and I said, what card do I have in my hand? And then we would play and he would guess the cards. And I said, okay, how did you know? And he said, the depth of your breath changed. Your breathing cadence changed. And I said, well, what do you think about these guys in the Vegas competition where they wear a baseball hat and the brim of their hat covers their eyes and they wear sunglasses? And I said, when someone comes in, say it's an NBA basketball player and they're wearing a baseball hat, I say, can you take your hat off? And they say, why? And I said, because I need to read you. I can't read you with that hat on. And but this poker star said, I love that. He says, because it shows me their weakness and then it brings out the next sign, which might be their breathing or the tension in their neck or their trapezius muscle or whatever it happens to be. And then we had this little game. I've got pictures and movies of all of this. We sat in front of a mirror and we had to become expressionless. I could not do it. I couldn't get the expression off my face. And it wasn't possible for me, and I'm a terrible poker player. But he could adopt this expression. And do you know, that's his training. He sits in front of a mirror practicing to be expressionless. Now, do you see how much work I put into that opportunity to learn how to read people? Criminals, go spend some time with some criminals. They know who the next mark is. They know where weakness is to exploit. It might be white collar crime. It might be physical crime. Physical crime is easy. That's easy to spot the old frail lady, and you know whose purse you're going to snatch. But all of the signs that confidence tricksters use to find physical weakness, well, biology and life will find your physical weakness. So there you go. Anyway, that's my first little story. I had another fella who was a chief of Homeland Security for the US. His job was when someone crossed the border and they got taken into secondary inspection, you know, the heavy duty guys. These are the guys who are experts in interrogation. Is this person lying? Are they truly a refugee, or whatever the case may be? Or maybe they're a criminal. I started the assessment, and I set up, when a person comes to the clinic here, they sit in a room with beautiful leather couches. They sit in front of a fire. Off to the right is a beautiful panoramic view of a forest. I mean, this is all laid out absolutely on purpose. The couches don't face one another. They're at 90 degrees from one another. This is interrogation 101. I get down to the same level as the person. I need them to tell me what the impediments are for the previous 12 clinicians as to why they failed to get their back pain better. I'm the guy who has to make the difference. I need to extract information that they've never told anyone else before. So I sat there at 90 degrees. I purposefully chose a tone in my voice, and I probed this guy. Anyway, at the end of the assessment, which lasted about 40 minutes, where, by the way, even he, a hard-baked master interrogator, was on the verge of tears, telling me about some of the impediments and challenges he has because of his back pain. At the end, he said, "Professor, that was the most masterful interrogation using all of the techniques that I've ever seen. How did you know?" And I said, "I've done a lot of work to study these things." So now back to your question. If you want to know how to do this, do you see how I've worked at developing skill to extract information?
I love that. That's great.
It doesn't come easy. To become a master of the craft takes a lifetime. But now I have another comment about modern life. How many masters of the craft are there? You know, a century ago, a guy would spend 50 years to become a master cooper, a barrel maker. Man, did that guy know how to build barrels. Now, someone develops some software that's obsolete in 3 years. Where are the masters? They don't exist anymore.
Wow. Man, that's such a good point. I love that answer.
It's kind of a double-edged sword. I feel like I can be anywhere walking around the grocery store and you can't not see all of the movement dysfunctions in people.
Isn't that fabulous? Yeah, my wife, I drive her nuts all the time. You just love watching people, and you know exactly what their situation was. And when I was younger, you know, I'd go to a gym, or I'd be somewhere, and I'd just go up to a person and say, you know, if you didn't do that but did this instead, I can see your pain, it would go away. And they'd look at you as if you were from Mars, you know. And you know, of course, they have no idea who you are, and that kind of thing.
I joke with Bethany all the time. Like it seems like she'll look at somebody and ask them like, "Oh yeah, how was that car crash you were in when you were 3 years old and you were sitting on the left passenger side and the car hit you at 38 miles an hour at this angle?" Like, what? How can you see that? That's insane. It's so cool. Dr. McGill, this has been an amazing conversation. Your book is fantastic. We can't recommend Back Mechanic enough. You wrote it in a style that helps people understand their own pain and get out of it. And the illustrations are great. The descriptions are great. It's very well done. It's helped me personally. It's helped the clients that we see. It's helped my father. It's helped so many people. And we're just so grateful for you and for your work and for your gift to observe and your willingness to share that information in a way that isn't just generating more revenue for you all the time. It's helping people actually address and fix their issues and get out of pain. And we're so grateful for you and your time today. Where can people go to find your work and learn more about their back pain and hopefully take some steps forward?
Right. Well, I appreciate that, Casey. The best place is our website, backfitpro.com. And what the person will find there's 2 portals of entry. If you're a clinician, that's one portal. If you're a back pain sufferer, that's another one. And we give you, access to different podcasts like you're doing today, some articles and opinion pieces. There's some videos there. And then our books, Back Mechanic, I wrote for the lay public. I have to tell you, I never in a million years thought I would write a book for the lay public. My previous books were all for clinicians and coaches and high performance athletes and that kind of thing. And there was actually a book editor who said, I read your medical text, Low Back Disorders, and it really helped me. But man, it's a heavy read. Could you write something for the lay public? And I said, well, I can try. And I wrote my first draft, and she said, this will never sell. You've got to have a title, Fix Your Back Pain in 3 Easy Steps. And I said, but that's a lie. It's not possible. And I'm not doing it. So anyway, I wrote Back Mechanic, and as you know, it's 17 chapters, but it's systematic. It guides the person through a self-assessment of their pain triggers and then shows them what to do and not do based on the answers to their self-assessment. So it has truth, but the struggle was, could I balance sufficient detail that would help people and tell them the truth, but balance that off with still making it consumable and not too heavy. So I hope I found the balance there. If we have any clinicians listening, they might be interested. This whole pandemic, it's been such a curse and such a blessing. The blessing from my perspective is I'm not on the road teaching courses. We've put them all online. So if people who are clinicians are interested in the McGill way of helping people with back pain, the 3 courses, the foundation, the assessment, and then the enhancing performance bit at the end is all available online now.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Anyway, that's I'm not the greatest on social media. In fact, I abhor it. So I don't go on. However, my daughter actually puts things on our what do you call that now? Instagram. She puts it on Instagram, and my only rule to her is it has to have content.
That's great. That's really awesome. We're going to link to all of that in the show notes. Dr. Stewart McGill, thank you so much for appearing with us today. I'm going to go down to my living room and take that rake and move it to the shed. I think that's a really good idea. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for helping us understand the causes of back pain and how to get out. We really appreciate you and your time today.
Okay, Casey and Bethany, thanks so much for all you are doing, and best of luck with this podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.